And Global Affairs Analyst Sam Phatey joins us from Washington, D.C. to discuss the situation in Afghanistan. Good to have you join us, Sam Phatey.
My pleasure.
So, Kandahar has now been captured by the Taliban. It houses an international airport and also very strategic agro and industrial output. Where does this leave the Afghan government?
It leaves them in a very dire situation. In fact, winning Kandahar and it being in control of the Taliban could significantly indicate, by all means, that they are in control right now. And it also means that they can claim to be the authority in Afghanistan. Now, this is unfortunate. Mind you, the Taliban movement started in Kandahar. It has been their capital. It has been their city. Economically, Kandahar is very important, not just strategically in terms of the military operations, but it is the economic hub of southern Afghanistan as well. So this is unfortunately a big game for the Taliban, and it shows why the U.S. withdrawal in itself was actually so premature.
And the U.S. has to be worried about this, and even if they aren't worried about the fact that the Taliban is capturing cities, but the pace at which they're capturing cities have to be worrying for the U.S. 10 cities in 1 week.
You know, it's important to note that despite all the trainings that the Afghan forces have received, the withdrawal of the U.S. forces have also demoralized them. I mean, they do not have the kind of support that they have in terms of gaining control. The Taliban were only able to lose control of Afghanistan because the U.S. Special Forces were there, and they were the ones that were leading operations. The question is the Taliban armed forces or the is the Afghanistan armed forces or their military ready enough in order to fight back? I doubt that. Perhaps now the U.S. and other international partners of Afghanistan have to sit down and negotiate and try to talk. Now the question is with the Taliban, because now they have a lot of leverage. Will they be able to make certain concessions, which I doubt. And it leaves other countries like Pakistan with a lot of issues to worry about, sharing borders with Afghanistan and having cross-border issues in terms of terror attacks, etc. I mean, already the Pakistani Prime Minister indicated that Pakistan always have to clear up America's mess, and they no longer want to do that. And so the Taliban have a lot of gain here right now. So I don't know how peace talks are going to go moving forward.
Absolutely. The odds are now in the favor of the Taliban. The peace talks itself are now a challenge. But you mentioned interestingly earlier about how it is premature for the U.S. to have left. Is it really the fact that the U.S. left or how they left? Because many people feel that it was time for the U.S. to leave that region or that country. But do you think that at least some level of agreement with or conditions should have been set for the Taliban before the withdrawal?
See, when people have a general opinion that it is time for the U.S. to leave a particular region, doesn't mean that in terms of national security, that it is the right thing to do. Now, casually, it may look like it is time for the U.S. to withdraw, but in terms of ensuring that they should have had their own studies and they should have had their own facts that the Afghan military is not ready to face any challenges, despite how equipped they are. They are not ready to face the Taliban. Already, the way that they are taking over, the Taliban is taking over the country, proves that removal of the withdrawal of the United States and its allies should have been strategic, so that it should not be sudden and rapid. It should have been in slow pace, and it should have been strategic. And most of these countries, when they were leaving, including Britain, they took all their equipment, critical equipment with them. These were things that they could have left with the Afghan forces, and they could have helped them put certain structures in place, and they could have trained them to use this other equipment and how they operate in terms of intelligence so that they can counter the Taliban forces. But they didn't get any of that. They left with a significant amount of their equipment, if not all of them.
And it's interesting because the Afghan forces are like 10 times even more than the Taliban, but we see how they have not been able to capture the Taliban and take back these cities from the Taliban because of the reasons you just mentioned, the equipment. And let's look at the fact that Kabul is now the worry of a lot of analysts, and they fear that Kabul could fall easily if Kandahar has been taken. Do you see the possibility of of Kabul falling to the hands of the Taliban?
With the Taliban taking over Kandahar, there is no doubt that they had the ability to take over Kabul. It's a question of when at this particular point in time. You are only asking when will that happen. But I am not more worried about them taking Kabul. What I would be looking at right now is what is going to happen after they take over Kabul. What is the fate of Afghanistan? In fact, where does that put the U.S. war against terror? It was the Taliban that hosted Osama bin Laden and his friends. Where does that put the fight against terrorism? It pretty much renews it. So it just makes it a perpetual cycle. And that is where the worry should be. How does the US and its allies, especially in Europe, whether it's the UK, France, and Belgium, how do they all come together now and address what I would call a new threat? They don't know where the threat is coming from anymore. They don't know who are going to be the new leaders of some of these groups. That should be now their biggest worry. So their rapid withdrawal was very illogical at the end of the day.
Absolutely, and that's the fear, isn't it? The fact that if the Taliban takes over, what could become of Afghanistan? We're talking about a group that want to establish an Islamic state. We're talking about a group that really do not believe in girls' education and girl rights. And if that should happen, we are looking at the fact that all the girls in Afghanistan would have to stop going to school, and women's rights will be at stake. What can the US, the UK, and other countries do from the outside? And what is the role of Pakistan in all of this?
Well, right now, I think the US, the UK, and others are making political decisions rather than logical security decisions, not just to protect their homelands, but to protect what they have fought for over these 2 decades. And out of the many people that have died and got wounded during this war, they are making political decisions that would backfire. All the people. Fact that the people's liberties would be seized again, and if the national security situation in their homelands would continue to be at risk, a lot of girls would not go to school, a lot of rights would be withdrawn. Afghanistan would go back to the way that it used to be. And the biggest mistake that the US and its allies are doing right now, they are warning Americans and the British and other people, their citizens, to move out of Afghanistan. In fact, they are sending troops not to help the Afghan forces to regain control. They are actually sending them to withdraw their citizens and leave the rest to the Afghan government, the military, and its people to figure out on their own. That is a disaster. It's a disastrous recipe in the making, and it's a ticking time bomb.
What about those in the region? For example, Pakistan. There have been criticism towards Pakistan and its refusal to help. Although the foreign minister has said they are helping in one way or the other, Pakistan has a level of control over the Taliban. What role can it play?
Pakistan can, if I were in the Pakistani government or in their security and intelligence sector, I would not pick up arms and go fight across the border. As the Prime Minister Khan said, they are not going to keep cleaning up the mess that US keeps on creating. And you can absolutely understand war is costly. You're talking about Pakistan, they have other issues to take care of, including internal security issues of their own. So they would rather focus on that and protect their borders and make sure this doesn't spill over to them. Of course, the likelihood of that is high, but there are things that they can do in order to prevent that or minimize that. And if minimize it, they cannot stop it completely, but they can minimize and control it. And I think that is what their focus is on. But the only role that they can play regionally would be to help in terms of negotiations. And talking of negotiations, like I said earlier, the Taliban has some leverage now, and that is going to make it very, very difficult for the Afghan government. So what can Pakistan do is just to help them in terms of bringing them together to talk. Will that talks achieve anything? Maybe or maybe not.
Really devastating situation in Afghanistan, especially for the civilians who live there, who are now thrown in a humanitarian crisis. Thank you so much for talking to us. Global Affairs Analyst Sam Phatey.
My pleasure.